Well, welcome back. You know, a couple of weeks ago I talked about newsmen, reporters, such in the media, that actually get out there and participate in some of the problems in which they are, they're involved in things they're reporting on, to the extent that sometimes they are the problem. Now, I don't know if that's the case with some of this recent crackdown by Egypt on certain individuals from Al Jazeera, the television station in the Middle East. It promotes a lot of the Al-Qaeda and militant Islamic things. Many governments in the Middle East don't like it, particularly Egypt. Now, I'm not going to take sides on this. In our country, we have freedom of speech, freedom of the press, that kind of thing, and we want that. But there are times, I understand, that there are people who are involved in the media that are actually working under a motivation of bringing down the country or bringing down the government in those areas. So I'm not going to get into it from that viewpoint, but just to add a little more information as to your understanding of what's going on relative to this crackdown. For instance, in Egypt, and by the way, this is under the new constitution that Egypt has, you apparently cannot criticize the court or the judiciary in Egypt. It's against the law. It's against the Constitution. So if you're going to talk about that, you're getting into a lot of trouble. Just like if you were an individual in this country and you wrote an article against a Supreme Court decision, that's great. That's freedom of speech. That's your right to do. In Egypt, it should be your right, but they don't allow it. At any rate, the police briefly jailed a camera crew for the Associated Press on the suspicion of working for Al Jazeera. And so we see that apparently the Egyptian authorities believe that the Associated Press from the United States is working with Al Jazeera. And so apparently they let them go, but they suspect that they're working together. The other thing was that they've charged 4 individuals that work for Al Jazeera, and 2 of the journalists have had extensive experience at Western news organizations. One is Mohammed Fadel Fahmy, had previously worked for CNN and contributed to the New York Times. And another one, Peter Christie, an Australian journalist who won a Peabody Award last year, working for the BBC in Somalia. So in addition, 2 others were cameramen and a producer. So the Egyptian authorities are saying, wait a minute, you guys, you're working for the Western press, and yet you're working for this other outfit, Al Jazeera, which is pro-militant Muslim and so on and so forth, wants to bring down the military junta in Egypt and so on and so forth. But my point here is this. These individuals have a have a bent. They have a motive for being out there in addition to what they're writing and reporting on. And in this case, if it's true, and they're working for Al Jazeera, they are working for militant Islamic governments and countries, societies. So it shows that they have a bias. And that is the main point here. They are biased. It's not unusual, but sometimes you don't see these things without getting into the background of the individuals particularly. Also, the Egyptian government has cracked down on a man who put out a Twitter post, a liberal, and he's they refer to him as a liberal intellectual. His name is Amr Hazawi, and he is connected to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He lives in Egypt, but the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, just to give you a hint, right after World War II was headed up by Soviet spy Alger Hiss. The Carnegie Endowment has always had as its leadership members of the Council on Foreign Relations who stand for a one world government under state-controlled economy. In a word, socialism. So we see this filtering in through all of this apparatus. And by the way, this man was arrested here because he criticized the Egyptian government's judiciary and its ruling against 3 organizations from the United States. They refer to them here as nonprofits, American nonprofits. Well, let me give you a little bit of a background to these American nonprofits. Now, I've talked about this before, but these 3 American nonprofits were working together to bring down the Mubarak government, which resulted in the Morsi government, the militant Islamic government, which in turn resulted in burning Christian churches, killing Christians, bringing about a militant Egyptian Brotherhood state. So that was the net result of these 3 American organizations. And the military under Mubarak didn't like it. And they arrested a number of the agents that were working there full-time from these 3 American nonprofits to bring down the government. The pressure was applied to the American government. The American government put pressure on the Mubarak government to turn these guys loose. They came back to the United States, but they were tried in absentia, and this guy didn't like the judiciary's, the Egyptian judiciary's opinion on these 3 organizations and their personnel. What were they? They were Freedom House, the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs, the International Republican Institute. Freedom House was established in 1941 with, among others, Eleanor Roosevelt, Rex Stout, and Ralph Bunche, who was later found to be a Soviet agent. Its chairman today, or at least quite recently, was William Taft IV, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Board members have included Zbigniew Brzezinski, Council on Foreign Relations, and founder of the Trilateral Commission, Bayard Rustin, former head of the Socialist Party, and Steve Forbes. People like that are part of this Freedom House. The National Endowment for Democracy, and this, you're going to have to bear with me on this one, because it was founded on the impetus of Ronald Reagan. It funds both the International Republican Institute and the National Democratic Institute. And they cooperate with such things as the United Nations Democracy Fund, so on and so forth. Board members include Lee Hamilton, Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Gephardt, Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, Bilderberger, Richard Holbrooke, Frank Carlucci, CFR, etc., etc. All these people are interspersed with Council on Foreign Relations initiatives and membership. The National Democratic Institute for International Affairs was founded by the National Endowment for Democracy and funded by the U.S. government through that National Endowment for Democracy. And it is associated with the Socialist Internationale, okay? Now, the Republican Institute, the International Republican Institute, was founded in '83, also by the National Endowment, funded by the U.S. government through there, and pulls its personnel from the Republican Party. John McCain, Council on Foreign Relations, Craner, Council on Foreign Relations, etc., and is associated with the People's Party of Europe. So basically, this is a very liberal, CFR-oriented Republican Institute. And it has worked with Freedom House and the Democrat Institute to bring down the Egyptian government and create the mess that what happened in Egypt. And Lindsey Graham has accompanied McCain over there and actually criticized the government for bringing down the Morsi, the military, for bringing down the Morsi government. So they went over to promote democracy, but in the end was actually helping build the Egyptian Brotherhood government in Egypt itself. Meanwhile, they're at home here giving us Republican principles, pro-life, pro-gun, all that stuff, born-again conservatives, but their actions in many areas overseas, McCain and Lindsey Graham and others, belie those things. They're in support of UN initiatives. They're over there doing things which are really messing up the Middle East and creating a terrible problem for the people there and the Christians there and our own government as far as that's concerned, if it means to really promote freedom in those areas. Now, this is a little bit of a rambling background, but I'm trying to give you a little bit of an insight of what's going on behind the scenes by individuals connected with the Council on Foreign Relations and al-Zawahiri, Zira, and that sort of thing, to obfuscate what you are getting as information in your newspapers. It's a very muddy situation. Always stand back a little bit and ask questions when you're reading things about what's going on in Egypt and other areas of the Middle East. Until next week, we'll see you then.